Welcome into Survivor Analytics. I am your host, Clyde, and today I'll be continuing my coverage of the Traitors US Season 3. Episode 5 just came out, which is probably the most straightforward episode of the season so far. This episode felt like a stepping stone towards a potentially bigger vote against either Danielle or Boston Rob in the next couple weeks. We can jump right in with the Traitors Meeting in the turret. Following Boston Rob's move last week to knock out Bob the Drag Queen, there was some immediate blowback. Carolyn feels that she can no longer trust Boston Rob as he's proven himself as a player that's willing to flip on an ally the moment he sees the opportunity. Meanwhile, Danielle is already planning ahead for a future flip against Boston Rob. Looking past that drama, the Traitors still need to take out one of the Faithfuls. Based on the distribution of shields from last week, there were 7 potential targets on the board. If you watch my strategic summary of episode 4, you know that I saw Ivor, Sam, and Gabby as the most likely eliminations. In fact, Sam and Gabby received serious consideration from the Traitors. This is where Boston Rob steps in and starts taking on that leadership role. Part of Rob's rationale in knocking out Bob last week was that it would increase his agency in the turret. He then utilizes that newfound power to make one of the more questionable moves of the season in killing off Robin. She goes out as the 4th murdered contestant. Now, there are some positive aspects of this boot. Robin was widely perceived as a faithful, and by knocking her out, the Traitors continued to magnify the target on that Bambi alliance. 2 of its 3 members were vulnerable in this round, and with all of them surviving, there's a growing suspicion that one of them could be a traitor. I think that this Robin boot played a part in the Nikki vote that we see at the end of the episode. For me, though, I still disagree with this decision. Robin, in my opinion, was one of the worst strategic players on the entire cast. She was consistently loud and incorrect, which directly benefits the Traitors. In the first round table, she is one of the lead voices pushing the vote onto Wells. Then in episode 4, she is one of the few contestants to not vote against Bob the Drag Queen. I see Robin as a lower level threat that the Traitors could string along and eventually outplay in the endgame. Plus, this Robin elimination basically solidifies Dolores' reputation as a faithful, as no one would really expect her to cut the other 3 housewives so early. I'd also throw out that with so many Bravo people going out in the first 5 episodes, I expect the rest of the season to take on a stronger strategic focus. Of the 15 remaining contestants, 6 of them come from social strategy games. Moving ahead to the mission, we get this challenge centered around solving riddles. Once players answer a riddle correctly, they can select one person to nominate for a shield. The dilemma with this challenge is the fact that only 2 players can end the game with shields. Throughout this part of the episode, most of the cast works out of self-interest, publicly nominating themselves after correct answers. Danielle pivots away from that trend, and we see her make some pretty bad decisions. She starts by nominating Dolores and cutting her ally Derek, which felt like an unnecessary move. It only served to create suspicion around her, and it burned her relationship with Derek. She later regrets that decision, and she attempts to put Derek back in contention for a shield. Throughout that saga, Danielle is working to build alliances with other contestants, which I respect, but she's doing it in a way that publicly sacrifices her own safety. It makes people wonder if Danielle is feeling safe because she's the one conducting the murders. The worst part of this section with Danielle is that public component. Derek pulls off an improved version of this move in the episode 4 mission. There, he individually helps other players construct their statues, but he's not really out in front with his support. He's able to build bonds without the social backlash, which is not the case for Danielle here. Anyways, Dolores and Sierra earned this week's shields. The Sierra shield won't have any real impact on the season. There was no way that the Traitors would consider cutting Sierra at this point, since there's so many people suspecting her. The Dolores shield might have actually impacted the direction of the season. Without that safety, I could see a world where the Traitors elect to knock off the final remaining housewife. So let's move on to this week's targets. There's still 2 players in Sierra and Nikki who have some heat on them due to this widespread belief that one of the Traitors volunteered themselves for the coffin twist. Derek seemingly leans more towards the anti-Sierra camp, but he ends up voting with the majority later against Nikki. One of the big surprises this week was Chrishell flipping against Nikki. Up until this episode, that Bambi alliance appeared really solid. You would think that for Chrishell to break up that trio, she would need some solid evidence against Nikki. In reality, Chrishell wants to target Nikki due to Nikki's reaction to the Bob vote. It feels like this move from Chrishell is based more on vibes than any real strategic play from Nikki. That was a rough read. But an even more surprising targeting from this episode was Danielle going after Carolyn. If you told me before this week that there would be some traitor infighting, I would feel 99% confident that it would happen between Danielle and Boston Rob. Even in the opening sequence of this episode, I thought we were headed towards an alliance between Danielle and Carolyn, as both of them did not trust Rob. Instead, Danielle decides to go full scorched earth. She believes that there is a survivor alliance between Rob and Carolyn, and in order for Danielle to eventually cut Rob, she first needs to take out Carolyn. This idea from Danielle is probably her worst strategic play of the season so far. I see Carolyn as the swing traitor between the Boston Rob side of the turret and the Danielle side of the turret. By going after Carolyn, Danielle only pushes her away. We also need to acknowledge the fact that Carolyn is one of the least suspected people in the entire castle. Danielle needs to wait for other players to pitch Carolyn before jumping onto that plan. Looking forward, I have much more confidence in Carolyn winning this battle, and based on the preview for next week, it seems like there will be more arguments between these two at the roundtable. But looking at the roundtable for this week, Nikki is taken out near unanimously. Dylan is the only player who casts his vote outside those people suspected through the coffin twist. I'll be interested to see how the other contestants react to Sierra in the next couple rounds. Right now, my guess is that Sierra's target will start to shrink, and she'll have a bit more flexibility in the game. So Nikki is the fourth banished player this season. I think that Nikki played a solid strategic game. She was able to position herself well within that Bambi alliance, but she struggled to overcome adversity. Once the traitors painted that target on her back through the coffin twist, Nikki was unable to regain the trust of the castle. And by the roundtable, she even loses the support of Chrishell and Gabby. Here's the strategic map going into episode 6. Rob now has the pair of Wes and Derek actively working against him. They both suspect Rob as a traitor, but they're biding time and waiting for that ideal opportunity to take their swing. I moved Bob H into the Bambi alliance. With Nikki out of the game, I expect Gabby and Chrishell to grow closer together, which makes Bob H the number 3 in that group. The last major addition to this map is the new rivalry between Danielle and Carolyn. To wrap up this video, we can run through my weekly tier list outlining every remaining contestant's chances of winning the show. 4 players in the 0 chance tier. This group of Sam, Sierra, Tom, and Ivor has sat at the bottom of this graphic for the entire season. Sam and Ivor remain buried in the edit, and I still have no confidence in any of Tom's strategic reads. Sierra is the only player that I could see moving up a tier, but I'd first need to see her shed that target from the coffin twist. Jumping over to unlikely victories, I'll admit that there's an argument for dropping both Danielle and Boston Rob into 0 chance. I don't see Danielle's targeting of Carolyn faring well for her next week. Meanwhile, Boston Rob has 2 of the most strategically savvy people on the cast, already eyeing him up as a potential traitor. I don't think that Chrishell perceives the game through a very strategic lens, but she's someone that's fully trusting of Boston Rob, so I expect the traitors to keep her around. The newest addition to this tier is Dolores. With all of the other housewives out of the game, Dolores feels like the one surefire faithful in the castle. The only way that I see her getting eliminated anytime soon is through a murder, but she earned a shield this episode. On to high upside, I'm feeling even better about Derek and Wes. Both of them have the correct read on Boston Rob, but they're careful as to not immediately jump at that opportunity to target him. If they can gather the votes against Rob, then that will solidify their reputations in the castle, as no one would expect production to introduce more than one traitor through the cage twist. Even though Gabby lost a close ally in Nikki, I still perceive her as the strategic head of that Bambi alliance. My guess is that she will be the last one standing from that original trio. Brittany finally gets some content this episode. During the mission, we hear her outline her approach of waiting until the very end to solve a riddle. The edit is starting to show that strategic side to Brittany's game, which makes me feel a lot better about her placement in this tier. Then there's the same contenders in Carolyn and Dylan. Carolyn is the only traitor in the game without any real heat on her from the faithfuls. Next week, we'll see how she responds to the adversity of Danielle gunning for her, but I doubt that the rest of the castle will buy into that theory. She continues to fly under the radar, so I look at Carolyn as the clear frontrunner to win this season. As for Dylan, this was a quieter episode for him. Now that Bob the Drag Queen is out of the game, Dylan is taking a step back and allowing other contestants to lead roundtable discussions, which is a good idea on his end. We also see Dylan unintentionally creating chaos amidst the traitors as he tells Carolyn that Danielle was throwing her name out. Ideally, that move builds trust with Carolyn, meaning Dylan is aligned with 2 of the 3 remaining traitors. Obviously, he'll need to sniff them out at some point, but by aligning with them now, he at least guarantees his safety in the short term. In my opinion, he's the most likely faithful to win the season. So that's everything from me. Thank you so much for listening, and tune in next week for my strategic summary of episode 6.